If you haven't heard, if news hasn't reached to where you are, we announced last week that Lacey and I are stepping down as lead pastors of Shiloh. What that means, or what that's going to look like, is that Joe Pearson, who you know and love, is going to be stepping in as the lead, and then basically Lacey and I are moving to Joe's position. So Joe and I are going to switch seats. He's stepping in as lead pastor. He'll take the steering wheel and drive for a while. And what we're going to do is stay on the teaching team, stay what I would call like Shiloh adjacent. Basically, exactly what Joe has been, we will be. So we're going to be here for the rest of July. Excited to see kind of how that plays out, what the transition looks like. I know that God's taken us some cool places to clear up any questions you might have. We really felt called, probably a little about the first of last year, to start looking at how to become more engaged as parents. Our kids are becoming teenagers and growing up, and we want to make sure that we catch those years. And so that's what we're doing. I'm excited. It's funny. The minute we have announced that Joe and Lila are going to be stepping in, it's like momentum has just caught all of a sudden. I think the personal, in-person, relational experience of what God's doing here is going to be exciting. And so I'm glad we're not just out, but we get to see it from a different seat. So, okay. We've been in a series about Mount Transfiguration. I preached it thinking it was going to be like this one-off sermon about Jesus, and he takes Peter, James, and John, and they see Moses and Elijah and the significance of everything that happened there. Life, not just life, but life plus. John 10:10 says that he came that we may have life and life more abundantly, and I think that is such a underutilized offer. That's something that God has made available to us, and yet we go, yeah, but I can settle for this. And there's so much wound up in the story. Even today, we're gonna set a record. I usually read about 4 or 5 verses. I'm gonna read a whole chapter, Exodus 19. But there's so much wrapped up into why Jesus meets Moses and Elijah. It wasn't on accident. It wasn't just the two he could grab. He specifically meets with 2 people that played significant roles at the top of a mountain in the Old Testament. And this is Jesus as he's about to go to the cross. And so you start looking at all the symbols that are represented in that story, and all of a sudden what you realize is there's no way that's a one sermon moment. There's so much going on there. Basically, the premise of the series is that life plus, life more abundantly, is not something that happens casually or on our way to somewhere else. There's so many times where God just kind of rocks along. It's interesting. Think about this. Jesus' life in the Word, if you don't know this, Jesus, who is what the cornerstone of everything our faith is built around, it's what the whole Bible points to. The whole Bible is one arrow pointing to the person of Jesus. He's what set right all of our salvation. He is what gives us purpose and vision and hope and passion and all these things that we talk about. And yet, for the 33 years that he was here on earth, only 3 of those years are documented. That means for 30 years of the life of Jesus, the Son of God, it was basically dark. It was basically quiet. Don't put pressure on yourself that every single moment is monumental. There are some days you just are alive and things are not important. That's not what this series is about. This series is specifically about the few times in your life that you're going to have a moment that requires your attention, it requires your retention and your intention. That God will remove the distractions and push you to a place that changes. Like, we don't go through radical change without radical loss. Radical loss is the catalyst for radical change. And this is taught over and over and over again. And so many times, the investment that it takes to get to the top of the mountain is the first step for retaining what you learned there and the intention to put it to use. If that was all that you got, the sacrifice that says that it's worth it. That's what the series is about. Exodus 19, I'm going to read 25 verses, and I love reading with an audience, but here's what's happening. Children of Israel just left Rephidim. They've had this personal experience with God in the desert. They leave Egypt. They're going to a place they thought was going to be rest. We know the way the children of Israel thought, had they got to Rephidim and it had been like this oasis, and had it been great, had the job worked out, had the marriage worked out, had the career moved out, had all these things that we put our hopes and dreams on, that's what they're going through. They're going through a transition. They found this little glimmer of hope, and they're going to go after it, and that place is called rest. I told you this thing is full of symbolism. The whole story is just packed, loaded, full to the gills of symbolism that you see it and you're like, oh, wait, we still do that. They wanted to go to a place of rest. How many times, I just wish I could win the lottery so I could quit my job. If I could just get to a place where I could rest. So they come through this season where Rephidim didn't work out the way that they thought it would. They had this personal experience with a God that they didn't really even know. And they come out of that, and the very next story after they've left Rephidim is this. Exodus chapter 19, verse 1. It's Old Testament stuff. Buckle up. This is like Game of Thrones level. It's not like PG-13 rated. It's the stuff that you read in the Bible that causes you to go like, huh? Here we go. On the first day of the third month after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day, first day of the third month, 3 months later, little details. I don't have time to, I just want you to catch every now and then the specific details. I'll keep going. I've got to, if we're not going to get done. On that very day, they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did in Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." These are the words you're supposed to speak to the Israelites. We still struggle to understand what a kingdom of priests means. We still resist that. We still want a representative to go talk to God and come back and be our person so that we kind of get to stay where we are and there's a go-between. That's why pastors get so burnt out so quickly, is because we struggle to understand what God meant when he said, "No, I want all of you to be a nation of priests." So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. Verse 9, halfway there almost. The Lord said to Moses, "I am going to come to you in a dense cloud so that the people will hear me speaking with you and always put their trust in you." Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes." This is the stuff I'm talking about where the Bible gets weird and we don't understand it. And be ready by the third day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, "Be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch it, or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death." It gets worse. "They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain." Stick with me, verse 14. The word holiness in the Bible is a word we don't discuss a lot in 2022 because it goes against our comfort. But holiness is to be set apart, to go against the stream, to go up when everything's pulling you down, to take gravity that goes this way and actually go that way. Holiness is to be intentionally set apart as useful to God's purpose. That's what holiness means. And this, what he's showing them, is a moment of holiness. And we're so rational as people that sometimes we miss the mountaintop experience. Sometimes we miss life plus because God is asking us to go against the cultural flow of traffic, to see what everybody else is doing and to do the opposite. And if we can't make sense of why, then we're like, eh. After Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them and they washed their clothes. And he said to the people, "Prepare yourselves for the third day, abstain from sexual relations." On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain. A very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. I try to just get through the verse. I know it's a distraction to stop and interject, but what you're about to see, the purpose of Exodus 19 is God establishing himself as king. God is about to establish himself as the king. He is the creator. He holds it all in his hand. He is going to give the Israelites just a little piece. I'm going to set you apart as holy, and then I'm going to show you a little bit of who I am. Everyone in the camp trembled. That means they're starting to get it. They understand. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. Now the mountain is trembling. People are trembling. The mountain's trembling. Smoke, thunder, all these elements of God's judgment. Remember Elijah, that's exactly what he experienced too, is that God's judgment is present, and they're not being destroyed. As the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So this is not the first time God has met Moses. The Mount Transfiguration was not the first time God had a meeting with Moses at the top of a mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to him, go down and warn the people, so they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them. Moses said to the Lord, the people cannot come up Mount Sinai because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountain and set it apart as holy. What does holy mean? Set it apart as different. Set it apart as not the same as everything else. Put parameters around it. Put limits around it. Put areas of behavior in your life. Put disciplines in your life. Put patterns in your life. Put things in your life that look different. People should know there's a difference in our lives. It should be a distinguishment. There is so much going on here, and God is using word pictures to tell the Israelites the story. 2 more verses, and then we'll get to my part. The Lord replied, go down and bring Aaron up with you, but the priests and the people must not force their way through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out against them. He repeats himself, which he does not very often do. So Moses went down to the people and told them. The Band-Aid being ripped off is this. You will casually only ever see one part of God's personality. I'm not saying that God can't interact with your life. It seems like God, for some reason, it's almost like suffering is the thing that scrapes the top layer off. Sometimes people are so lost in their suffering, they reach out to God and they have this very real God moment. Sometimes they put themselves through a discipline, a strict, like a pursuit of God. And I think one of the things about being a rich nation and a comfortable nation that is we lose our ability to pursue. We're so comfort driven that the idea of holiness is almost an inconvenience. Like when we talk about that God has a plan for your life that is different from your plan for your life, it's almost like we have to apologize to people for that. Have you noticed that when we start talking about holiness, according to what we believe to be true in the Word, it's so common that in society, it's almost like it's pushed back and go, well, that's not what I think. Well, what I think is, well, actually, for me, here's my truth. As though truth is something that can be parsed out amongst the individual people. And the Bible says, I came that you might have freedom. I came that you may have life more abundantly, life plus, life beyond. You can transcend, which means to be taken out above your own potential and to go on. And it says that that's God's desire for you. And it's so common that people have that moment where God is trying to draw them out as different, set them apart, and they go, I can't really make sense of that, so I'm not really interested. And then live in resentment that God isn't doing something miraculous. It's like we've tied God's hands to freely move in our life because we don't want to ever have to ascend to the top of a mountain. It's too hard. It's too much work. Doesn't make sense. They had just left Rephidim, where if God had given them what they want, they would have never left. He comes to Exodus chapter 19, and he's just establishing his authority. You see the call to holiness, the threat of death, don't come out here or you'll die. Smoke, fire, judgment. You're seeing a lot of the wrath elements of God demonstrated in this. Now, listen, my suspicion, it's like when you tell your kids, hey, don't touch that pot or I'm going to give you a whipping. The pot is actually, the actual damage, but you threaten them with something that they can understand. So don't disobey me. If you disobey me, it will hurt you. So you threaten them with, I'll give you a spanking. It's 2022. We're still allowed to spank kids. I don't know what the social rules are. I just tell you how it worked in my house. It's almost like God has given them something that is so serious that they can understand it so they're not tempted to try it. It doesn't say that anybody tried it. As harsh as that is of you'll be stoned or put to death. But more than that, I think sometimes we question, well, that doesn't seem very cool. All right, God, I don't know about that. Seems a little bit much, doesn't it? I go through this, where there are times where it seems like God is dragging me through something I don't want to go through, and my audacity as this useless, worthless, less than dirt by comparison to God opinion that I have wants to stand up in the face of a God who makes mountains tremble. And I don't even recognize it as that. I get so inflated with my own opinion. I get so excited about what I think or what I've learned that sometimes I forget who I'm talking to. Sometimes I get distracted from who I represent when I'm in this position. And then you see in the Old Testament, Exodus 19, where God goes, I need to remind you who I am. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it, this is verse 18, like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. It's interesting to me that the entire planet responds better to God's dominance as the creator than his creation. And I think that's maybe normal. I think sometimes children of powerful people are some of the only people that feel entitled to like backtalk. Like Alexander the Great, I don't know, Genghis Khan, however you say it. Like these great people, like their kids were probably the most disrespectful people in their lives. And I think sometimes we have that sort of a relationship with God where we're like, yeah, but I think if I were to view life plus reasonably, all given everything that I believe, maybe this is me, but sometimes I forget everything that I believe. Sometimes I'm so singularly focused on one thing that I forget I actually believe other things that would contradict that. You know what I mean? And to know that there's a God who makes demands that says, here's a line, do not cross it. This is what I want. This is best practices. This is how I expect you to live. There are times where I feel like kind of like, ugh, I don't want to talk to people about certain things in the Bible, as though they're going to not like me, as though I forget, like, no, I believe that the word speaks on behalf of the dominant force, the creation of universe, the God that holds the universe in his hand. And I think when people are around that level of power and awe and reverence, all of a sudden it changes. It's like we're drawn towards it and we're scared of it. And I don't know that people would say that about God right now. I don't know that people would say that about their relationship with Jesus, where they feel so overwhelmed with his magnitude that they're almost afraid of it, but drawn into it. It's almost like we've lost the Exodus 19 in our desire for life plus. And it is actually the thing that life plus hinges on, is the reality of who God is and how terrifying that is. How terrifying a God is that could claim absolute authority. Big enough that the mountains tremble, holds all the universe in his hands, including your issues, worries, and concerns. He holds it all in his hand. It's terrifying to think about this. We're so deadened to it. We're so scalded by our knowledge of the gospel that it's no longer getting into us, because think about it, God that big, knowing you as intimately as he does. That is a terrifying thought. It is a terrifying thought to know that level of God that demands holiness and to be set apart, and I don't care what the graphic's doing, go this way. Not only does he have that power in his hands, he knows all of you. He knows every atom in your existence, and that doesn't scare us. I think the reason a lot of us are not living in the reality of our potential is because we're just not that moved by the concept of God anymore. We've almost just kind of gotten deadened to it. We're glad that he's God and he's powerful, but then it's like we really kind of should be nervous at how relational he is. That really should cause us some concern. I don't know that I want a God that's that powerful knowing me this well, because I know myself pretty well, and there's some stuff that I'm just, ugh. I think that is why we get uncomfortable with the concept of being a nation of priests. Like I said, as Joe and Lila step in to take over the role of leader, the pressure is not on them. It's on you. It's on everybody listening, whether you're online, whether you're in person. The real burden of leading the kingdom to your people and to your group and to your circles, it's not on whoever's in the lead. It's a nation of priests. It's saying, God is saying, like, hey, I know you. I'm God, and these are my demands. The nerve to tell somebody that God demands anything. God goes, this is what I'm demanding. This is what I want out of my people. I want you to be a nation of priests. Whatever you expect of your spiritual leader should be expected of you. Your life is the most fulfilled, not when you're pursuing, I wish I could quote who said this the other day. I can't remember. The three main pleasures that people pursue is power, money, influence, and fame, I think were the four. And that all four of those lead to just misery. And it's like the most interest we have in God is him fulfilling those four things, when in reality, service and love and sacrifice and things that matter, that is where we start to experience the mountain moving God. Imagine a mountain trembling level of God that has taken a personal interest in you, and loves you. Jordan Peterson said this, I think it's so brilliant. He said, when the Bible talks about knock and the door will open, seek and you'll find, it's not talking about a God who operates like a fairy godmother. There's peace in what I'm about to say. There's a peace in it. It's hard, but there's a peace in it. He said it, and I think he's right. That God is establishing himself as the ultimate right. I want to do the right thing. I want to be in the right relationship. I want to be in the right job. I want to have the right career. It's like in modernity, we've decided there's no such thing as the ultimate right. And let's listen. And this is a giant hinging pivot point in this life plus, living life plus. This is part of the reason why Moses was at the top of the mountain with Elijah and Jesus. This is part of the reason is that when God sets himself up as the ultimate right, he can demand the ultimate sacrifice. We as people will sacrifice anything if we know what we're pursuing is right. And it's like in modernity, we've tried to eliminate the idea that there is such a thing as right, which robs us of the freedom to fully pursue anything. I don't want to fully pursue that. What if I'm wrong? I don't want to fully sacrifice for that. What if it's wrong? And God's going, I'm the ultimate right. And here's what comes next. Boom. On the heels of all this, on the heels of God establishing himself as the ultimate right, with the ultimate demands, demanding the ultimate sacrifice. Remember Elijah, he goes to the top, and what does he experience in God? Personal, still, small voice, grace, mercy, relational, personal. He was one that was represented. The other one that's represented is Moses, and Moses was the what? The law. The legality of what God demands from his people and the impossible standard that we can never achieve. That's why the very next story, God does all this in preparation for the law. Moses comes down, he's got the 10 Commandments. Again, back to the symbolism. I think this is so fascinating. Moses comes down off the mountain after an experience with God. Anybody remember the appearance that Moses had coming down off the mountain with God? He comes down off the mountain and he's glowing. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Wait. Where have I heard that? I've heard this before. It's like a precursor. It's like a foreshadowing to what God was going to do on the top of the Mount Transfiguration with Moses and Elijah. It's like this is all tied together. He's up there with two figures. We're going to get to it next week. He's up there with two figures. God in his mercy and God in his justice. The law is directly connected to justice because the 10 Commandments, God's law, as impossible as it is, it requires mercy for us to fulfill it. But that doesn't eliminate the fact that God has an ultimate right, an ultimate good, and an ultimate space to demand it. We've gotten so open-minded and that's not really my thing, that we've become this like spiritually out of shape, soft, flabby, not replicating God's will for our life, not looking like a Christian, not any distinguishment against the world. The river's going that way and we're going with them. The only difference is they're admitting what they are and we're not, because we call ourselves Christians. We call ourselves Christ followers. Like, how could you be a Christ follower going that way when it's that Jesus is going that way? How could you say that that's what you are when there's no desire to understand what the law is or demands? Not because following the law makes you good. To be clear, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is the proof is in the pudding. If you say that you're a Christ follower and he's going this way, which way should you be going? Throughout the entire Bible, he's asking people to do things that they couldn't understand at the time. They was asking people to go through things that they didn't understand at the time. Job, interesting concept. Again, of course, Timothy Keller said this. Job never got an explanation for why he suffered. God never went, okay, listen, here's the deal. Here's what was going on. It's this whole thing. Satan was being a jerk, so I had to put him in his place. Sorry, it's nothing. The answer that God gave Job was not, here's why you suffered. The answer that God gave Job, the season of suffering that you may be going through, if you haven't gone through one yet, that you will be going through. Listen, the reason for the suffering, the answer for the suffering, what makes the suffering okay, the ultimate sacrifice, whatever it costs you, when you say, I will give up everything to pursue the ultimate right, first of all, you have to say, there is an ultimate right. But second of all, whatever it takes, I want to pursue that because I'm so tired of the life and the results that I've got. I'm so tired of what my comfort is doing to me. In that moment of suffering, God's answer may not be, here's why you suffered, but he gave Job this answer. This is who I am. The mountains tremble. The universe melts and folds according to my words. Everything that's spoken was spoken out of my creativity, the voice of God that created everything. And it's almost like there's a comfort in that. It goes, okay, then you must know something I don't. I think there is something in my life. I think there's something so comforting about knowing that a God that terrifies me gave me mercy and favor and grace that I didn't. He knowing who he is one thing, but then he's demonstrated time and time and time again that in that power, in that terrifying, mountains trembling, overwhelming, bigger than my understanding God. He not only loves me, but he gave his son in an effort to redeem me back to himself. If the concept of God doesn't terrify you and draw you in, then we're not living in our full potential. We're not living with those mountaintop experiences. God doesn't have the authority in our lives to call us to the top of a mountain if we don't understand who he is or what he's done to redeem us back to himself. He got Moses to the top of the mountain and he said, "These are my demands. This is my list of rules." And I think it doesn't say this. I almost wonder if God didn't chuckle almost just a little bit at the fact that he knew we would never live up to it. He knew that there was going to have to be an Elijah moment. He knew there was going to have to be a justice and mercy moment. And I love that in that he goes, "But I'm not going to decrease my demands because of your inability to follow it. I have a plan for that. I have a plan for how to make that right. But it doesn't mean that the law or the rules or the demands that you find in the Bible are unreasonable or they're outdated or that you can achieve them and become good. You can't make yourself religious enough to become good, but these are still the demands. This is still the standard, and I'm not going to decrease it. I can set you apart for my purposes, for my plan." And I'm going to tell you, people, listen, there is nothing more significant, worth sacrificing for. There's nothing more sacred than the pursuit of right standings with the God that created the universe. When we've forgotten who he is, we'll forget how to follow him. When we remember who he is, we're drawn into it. We can't avoid it. It will draw us into a life of holiness. Life plus. Let's pray. Lord, when you look at the figures at the top of the Mount Transfiguration, they weren't just plucked. It wasn't just people randomly from the Old Testament. It was two people that you had a very specific encounter with. God, when you look at Moses establishing yourself as king, that's where it all starts. That's where our ability to follow you with intention and sacrifice and go through seasons of suffering, not because we have an answer for why we're suffering, but because we have an answer for who you are. God, in a transitional season at Shiloh, I pray that you would help us to see the process as worth it. God, challenge us that show us areas where we've just become complacent or lazy and we're hoping to maybe encounter you at the bottom of the mountain. We don't want to sacrifice for it. God, challenge us to a deeper understanding of holiness and the purpose and the value in that. Pray in Jesus' name, amen.